on the chilly morning of September 18, 2016. In the garrison town of Uri, near the Line of Control, LOC, in Jammu and Kashmir, life at the Indian Army Brigade headquarters was just beginning to stir. Soldiers were waking up, sipping hot tea, lacing their boots, and preparing for another day in one of India's most volatile sectors. The base housed nearly 150 Army personnel from the 6th Bihar Regiment, many of whom had recently rotated in. But that morning would be different. That morning would etch itself into the bloody pages of India's military history. At 5:30 a.m., 4 heavily armed terrorists crossed the LOC, having infiltrated under the cover of darkness. They carried AK-47s, grenade launchers, incendiary grenades, and high-energy plastic explosives. Their target was simple: kill as many Indian soldiers as possible. The attackers breached the camp's perimeter through a gap near the rear, exploiting the early hour when security rotation was at its lowest alertness. In mere minutes, they lobbed grenades into tents housing sleeping soldiers. Flames erupted, screams followed, and so began one of the deadliest terror attacks on the Indian Army in decades. The first explosion hit the tent of Lance Naik Rajesh Kumar. He never had a chance to scream. Others, like Sepoy Sham Singh, awoke to a ball of fire and instantly rushed to drag their brothers out. Within the first 10 minutes, the attackers had set 13 tents on fire. The base scrambled. Sirens blared. The Quick Reaction Team, QRT, from nearby barracks leapt into action, engaging the intruders in a close-quarter battle. Bullets tore through the smoky morning air. Major Anirban Chakraborty, stationed nearby, coordinated a rapid response while wounded soldiers were evacuated. Medics and Jawans worked side by side, risking everything. The fire was out of control. Ammunition depots began to cook off in the heat. But the soldiers fought on. Not one retreated. It wasn't just a matter of duty. It was about vengeance, about protecting their brothers, their soil, and their honor. By the time the base was secured and all 4 terrorists were gunned down, soldiers had already lost their lives. Over the next few days, 2 more succumbed to their injuries, bringing the total to 19 martyrs. India mourned. The nation was heartbroken, enraged, and shaken. Families cried on live television. Parents clutched photographs. Wives stood silently, draped in white, holding their children who could barely understand what had happened. One of the fallen, Sepoy Gurnam Singh, had spoken to his mother just the night before. "Main jaldi chuti lunga, ma," he had said. "I'll take leave soon, ma." But that leave would never come. Post-mortem analysis revealed that the attackers had Pakistani origin markings. Their weapons were engraved with Pakistani Army codes, and food items recovered had Pakistani manufacturing labels. India had no doubts. The attackers had been trained, equipped, and likely directed by Pakistan-based terror group Jaish-e-Mohammed, JEM. The breach was a massive intelligence failure. How had the terrorists managed to cross into Indian territory and remain undetected? Agencies scrambled, reports were compiled, recriminations flew. But while the political brass debated and defense analysts dissected the event on primetime news, something much more serious was brewing behind closed doors. In New Delhi's South Block, the strategic nerve center of India's defense policy. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who was attending a public event in Kerala when the attack happened, was briefed immediately. The news hit hard. By evening, he tweeted, "I assure the nation that those behind this despicable attack will not go unpunished." Behind closed doors, meetings were convened with NSA Ajit Doval, Defense Minister Manohar Parrikar, Army Chief General Dalbir Singh, and top RAW and IB officials. The government knew a strong response was needed, not just diplomatically, but militarily. Within 48 hours of the Uri attack, India began planning a counteroffensive. The Army's Directorate of Military Operations, DGMO, under Lieutenant Gen Ranbir Singh, began formulating a daring plan. A surgical strike, a precise cross-border operation targeting terrorist launchpads operating near the LOC in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, POK. The stakes were massive. For the first time, India would openly declare crossing the LOC in response to terror attacks. This was not war, but it wasn't business as usual either. The responsibility for executing this daring strike fell upon India's most elite unit, Para, Special Forces. A hand-picked team of nearly 70 Commandos, mainly from the 4 and 9 Para SF, began preparing under complete secrecy. These were men who could march through forests without making a sound, who could disappear into shadows, and who trained for missions that most soldiers only read about in books. The team underwent intensive rehearsals at undisclosed locations. They practiced simulated strikes on mock terrorist camps. Every building, bunker, and terrain was recreated. Drones and satellite imagery provided real-time data. They rehearsed until their moves were mechanical. Silence, speed, precision. RAW and the Intelligence Bureau at IB provided detailed inputs. Launchpads were identified in Lipa, Tatapani, Kel, and Bimber sectors in Poke. These were staging areas where terrorists were being readied to cross into India. The Indian commandos would have to cross the LOC under cover of darkness, strike with deadly accuracy, and return before dawn to avoid escalation or ambush. Even one capture could trigger diplomatic chaos. Every step was calculated. On the night of September 28, 2016, under moonless skies, the commandos were inserted close to the LOC via helicopters and on foot in total radio silence. Some had to crawl for over 2 kilometers to reach their positions. At exactly 2:30 a.m., the teams began their advance. They split into 8 teams, each assigned a different launch pad. Using laser-guided sights, thermal imaging, and satellite coordination, they crept forward. Most launch pads were located on elevated terrain, requiring uphill movement in silence. At 3 a.m., they struck. In coordinated ambushes, the para-SF neutralized over 35 to 40 terrorists and several Pakistani handlers. Every terrorist was either shot, blown up, or gunned down as they tried to flee. The operation lasted around 4 hours. Not a single Indian soldier was captured. 2 commandos were injured due to landmine blasts but were evacuated successfully. By dawn, the teams had returned to Indian territory. India had crossed the Low Sea, and this time the entire world would know. At 12 p.m., on September 29th, DGMO Lot Gen Ranbir Singh addressed a press conference. India conducted surgical strikes last night at terror launch pads across the LOC. The world was stunned. This was a paradigm shift in India's military posture. Pakistan denied the strikes, but the damage was visible. Intelligence intercepts and media reports confirmed the high casualties and structural destruction at the launch pads. India had changed the game. The nation erupted in patriotic fervor. Crowds gathered in streets chanting slogans. Candle marches were held for the Uri martyrs. Schools taught students about the valor of the Indian Army. Families of soldiers stood tall. "Mere bete ki shahadat bekar nahi gayi," said the father of a slain soldier. "My son's sacrifice did not go in vain." Bollywood, political parties, and citizens across the spectrum applauded the Army's courage. Songs were dedicated, murals were painted, and history was made. The surgical strikes didn't lead to a full-scale war, but they redefined India's doctrine. For years, India had followed strategic restraint. That changed. The world now saw India as a nation willing to strike if provoked. Many countries, including the US, France, and Japan, acknowledged India's right to self-defense. Diplomatically, Pakistan found itself increasingly isolated. The Uri attack took 19 lives, but the surgical strike that followed saved countless more by pushing back terror launch pads. It showed that India would no longer be reactive, that its soldiers' blood would not spill without consequence. And it reminded the world that behind every uniform is not just a soldier, but a lion. Today at the National War Memorial, the names of the 19 martyrs from Uri are etched in stone. But more than that, they are etched in our hearts. Their sacrifice led to one of the boldest chapters in India's military history. Their blood brought justice. Their story brought a nation together. And their legacy will forever whisper through the mountains of Uri. We were not afraid to die because we knew India would rise.